Praise your name, Jesus. And thank you for your grace and mercy, Lord. How we love you, Lord.
Everyone needs compassion, love that's never failing. Let mercy fall on me. Everyone needs forgiveness, the kindness of a Savior, the hope of nations. Savior, He can move the mountains. My God is mighty to save. He is mighty to save. Forever, author of salvation. He rose and conquered the grave. Jesus conquered the grave.
Hallelujah. Praise your name, Lord Jesus. Thank you, Lord.
So take me and find me all my fears and failures. Fill my life again. I give my life to follow everything I believe in. Now I surrender. I surrender, Lord. Savior, He can move the mountains. My God is mighty to save. He is mighty to save. Forever, author of salvation. He rose and conquered the grave. Jesus conquered the grave. Shine your light and let the whole world see. We're singing for the glory of the risen King. Jesus, shine your light and let the whole world see. We're singing for the glory of the risen King. Savior, He can move the mountains. My God is mighty to save. He is mighty to save. Forever, author of salvation. He rose and conquered the grave. Jesus conquered the grave. Savior, He can move the mountains. My God is mighty to save. He is mighty to save. Forever, author of salvation. He rose and conquered the grave. Jesus conquered the grave.
As the band plays that through, let's lift our hands and our voices in this place. Let's give Him praise. Praise your name, Jesus. This is all you want. We thank you for your love. And we praise you. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Savior, He can move the mountains. My God is mighty to save. He is mighty to save. Forever, author of salvation. He rose and conquered the grave. Jesus conquered the grave.
Looking at the tools of the enemy to dislodge our hope in God. And this morning we're looking at the subject of impatience. I have 4 texts. I will try to touch on all of them this morning. The first is 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18. 2 Corinthians 4:16 through 18, that'll be a primary text. You can put your finger in there, or if your Bible has a little marker or something like that. Paul writes and says, "So we do not lose heart. Though our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed day by day. For this slight momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal." Isaiah 64, verse 4, one verse. "From of old no one has heard or perceived by the ear, no eye has seen a God besides you, who acts for those who wait for him." And it's that last part, who acts for those who wait for him. Psalm 23:6, you probably don't need to flip to it. "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever." And Lamentations 3:25, "The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him." Impatience and learning to wait for God. Some subjects brush right up close to us. I just look out over this congregation and I can see faces. And I can spot people right now who are having a tough time of it. Maybe at work, maybe in your marriage, maybe some aspect of your family life, maybe a physical situation, maybe a legal situation. And there you sit, you've been calling out to God, and you're still sitting there with the same mess on your plate. And the conclusion that you're reaching, it's a wrong conclusion, but the conclusion that you're reaching is nothing is happening. Or I wouldn't still be experiencing what I'm experiencing. There is something happening. What's happening, and it relates to this series, is your hope in God is either deepening or diminishing right now. And that has everything to do with the spiritual fruit and growth that's going to take place in your life, or the opening up of your life to rash courses of action that will look to other things rather than God and gradually displace God from your thinking and your plans and your priorities. All that's going on right now, whether you're thinking about it or not. We'll try this morning to look at each of those texts briefly. We've been taking this whole series, and especially these last 4 messages, to say, I think, something deeply biblical and radically empowering to the life of holiness, without which, Hebrews says, no one will see the Lord. And the central thought to this series can be stated briefly, even if unfolding it has taken quite a while. The central thesis is, where you place your hope determines your growth in God or your growth in sin. That's it. Faith grows hand in hand with hope, because hope, future anticipating hope, that leans into God, says his loving kindness is better than life. That is, his coming loving kindness in my future, wherever I am right now, what he has prepared for me, what he's going to do in me, what he's going to do with me, is better than the life I can see with my physical eyes or establish with my physical hands. His future kindness, the kindness in which I presently hope, is going to be better than the security or satisfaction that I can establish if I take matters into my own hand right now. So hope, join hands with faith in relishing and cherishing the truth that it will be better for my satisfaction and better for my security. There's the future look. To please God rather than to please myself or please anyone else. Hope and faith join hands in banking on God's future grace right now. Banking that it's more rewarding than any promise that sin or temptation or compromise could ever offer. And that choosing God's promise and God's way over any other substitute in any other circumstances will be better than life on any other terms. That's it. Hope is faith for the future. Hope is leaning into God for your future. Hope is where I bank my life in the present. Hope is investing my future in God. And because there is nothing Satan is more anxious to do than set our hopes anywhere else. He really doesn't care on what. Set your hope on money, set your hope on fame, set your hope on power, pleasure, satisfaction, and security is the umbrella term I'm using for all those things. That's what he wants to do more than anything else, because once Satan has your hope, he has you. He has where you're going to be banking and investing your life for your future. So what we've been doing for the last few weeks is we've been looking at the tools that the devil uses to divert hope away from God. He uses pride to turn us from God's sovereignty to our own lordship over our satisfaction and our security. He uses anxiety to turn us from God's bounty and care to the limitations of our own resources. And today, we're going to study the fight of hope against impatience. Point number one. We need to understand what impatience really is and connect it with our relationship with God. We are inclined, in this age particularly, we are inclined wrongly to reduce impatience to just a personal matter, like our temperament. I was just born impatient. We even admire it. A person who won't settle for anything but the best. Every ad in the world is geared to that. And in this, we greatly wrong our souls and we limit the freeing work that the Holy Spirit might accomplish through repentance in our souls. The truth is, and we need to get this, impatience is a very specific, distinct form of unbelief. It's not just some neutral emotion. Impatience, like pride and like anxiety, is a very specific form of unbelief in God. Impatience is unbelief in two directions. It's always caused by unbelief about the goodness of God's care. Why is he allowing this to happen to me? If he really loved me. And secondly, I said unbelief in two directions. Unbelief about the goodness of God's care and unbelief about the wisdom of God's timing. Why is he taking so long? Why is he so slow? Look, look at me, he's doing nothing. Think about it. Impatience springs up in our heart when our plan is shattered or interrupted by circumstances for which we see no reason or explanation, or God's work isn't meshing very well with my schedule and when I'd like to see him work, which is sooner rather than later. And my prayers, it's just way too slow. Why are we laboring this point when it seems so obvious? Well, because until impatience is identified, rightly identified, as a form of unbelief about the goodness of God or the timing of God, until we actually diagnose impatience the way a doctor exposes a tumor or a deadly virus, then we'll never fully appreciate Satan's plan to use impatience as an enemy of hope in God. So remember, the devil wants to use either, let's put it this way, either the place of your circumstances or the pace, wasn't that brilliant, of your circumstances. The place of your circumstances or the pace of your circumstances. He doesn't care which, but he wants to use either or both of those to dislodge your hope and delight in God. So recognize what it is, impatience. It's unbelief. Point number 2. Like pride and anxiety, impatience spawns a host of other sins by diminishing my vision of ultimate, eternal realities. And now you come to one of those texts we read at the beginning where Paul addresses this in his own experience and how he dealt with it. The 2 Corinthians 4 text. 2 Corinthians 4, 16 through 18. We'll be looking at this for a few minutes now. 2 Corinthians 4, 16. So we do not lose heart. I'm going to look at that phrase in a minute. Though our outer nature is wasting away. Wasting is such a good phrase because it always looks so pointless. The struggles, the trials that don't go away. That's why the why question comes up all the time. Just wasting away. I don't see any good in it. Though our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed day by day, and you have to do it day by day. Because this battle with impatience isn't going away. It's here until the grave or Jesus comes. For this slight momentary affliction is, and here is a great verb, is preparing. It's not here yet. It's just getting something ready. Is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. In other words, you're going to come to a time where when you see what God has for you, you will never think of these things again. Not because you won't have a memory, but because they aren't significant enough. It doesn't look like that now, but that's because these things that God has, they're just in the preparation stage. They're not in the finally revealed stage. We hope for them. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. If the devil can frame my satisfaction and security with immediate, material, visible things, he accomplishes two of his aims at once. First, my hope becomes attached to tangible, visible objects rather than God and his promise for my future. Oh, understand, nothing changes in my theology. I still believe everything I believed. I still say I love God more than I love anything else. Christians never deny that. We're not stupid. But in actual practice, I will bleed more when I lose these material things than I will bleed when I miss my devotions. So my creed stays the same. It's the object of my hope and my satisfaction that shifts. And there are, believe me, very few Christians who are honest enough to diagnose that problem and expose it for what it is. I say it again. The devil accomplishes two goals at once. My hope becomes attached to tangible, visible objects rather than God and His promise for my future. And the devil works hard to root my satisfaction and my security in this world. That's all he cares about. If he has my hope, he has me. And you can see that in our text. I didn't make comment on it, but in his opening words in 2 Corinthians 4:16, the very first part of the verse, he says, "So we do not lose heart." And he doesn't lose heart because his hope is fixed in eternity rather than the visible things. But if his hope were shifted, if his satisfaction or his security were of the stuff of this material world, he would lose heart. And when he says lose heart, he doesn't just mean it the way we usually mean it. Become disheartened, discouraged, a little down. He means the heart in the sense of where Jesus lives in your heart, that central part of you. You lose yourself. He would lose himself to the degree that he placed his hope in anything but God. That's what he's saying. I said the devil accomplished two things when he draws our hope and fastens it to the material world. Here's the second thing. And he knows this better than we know it. The power of sin will continue to dominate my life as long as there are expected benefits of convenience, pleasure, or gain. That's because we were all designed by God. We were created this way so that we will do anything to protect our own joy. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. We were designed to pursue and protect our own joy. It's not a sin to live for joy. The sin comes when we sell ourselves short in our pursuit of joy. We can only protect our hearts, so we do not lose heart, Paul says. We can only protect our hearts to the degree that we understand our greatest joy is God Himself. Another way of saying this is we protect ourselves as we hope in God. As long as our greatest joy is God Himself, we will hope in God. Our sin is not that we pursue joy. Our sin is that we believe the devil's lies and settle for less joy than God intends when we fix our heart on visible, material, transient things. This is profoundly related, church, this is profoundly related to holiness, though many Christians have never actually thought it all the way through. We need to think it right through. It's work to think it right through. We open our lives up to sinful distractions and sinful reductions when we pursue secondary joys as primary joys. The person who has understanding to see that his greatest joy is found in God will not allow anything else to usurp God in his life. He will keep his hope in God. I know all this can seem hard to digest. But you can see it working itself out in Paul's experience in that Corinthians text. As Paul writes those words, he's having a rough go of it. He says slight affliction, but he's having a rough go of it. He's doing his best to win the lost, and the lost hate him for it. He's doing his best to lead the church, and the church is almost against every single thing he does and tells him so. Add to this the fact that he's not getting any younger. His body is starting to experience nothing but pain and old age and a hard life with no Advil or Tylenol 3. I mean, there had to be times when he just sat there and said, "What? I'm going to grow a beard, move to San Francisco, sell real estate." I've made that comment a number of times, and I always think there's got to be a real estate agent sitting here thinking, oh, so he thinks any fool can sell real estate. I don't mean that. I'm just saying. So there's Paul. Now, if Paul's joy were rooted in his success, he would lose heart. Remember, not just get discouraged, lose his heart for Christ. If his joy and his hope were in his health, it's getting worse every day, and there's virtually nothing he can do about it. If his joy and his hope were rooted even in his ministry, he'd lose heart. But here's the secret of Paul's hope and Paul's patience and Paul's endurance. Here's how he doesn't lose his heart with false hopes. He says, we don't lose heart. Though our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed day by day. And this slight momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory, beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. Paul's saying, I am so certain of the eternal, I am so certain of what God is doing, even in my trials to prepare me for the eternal, that I'm not swayed by what happens to me in the temporal, in the material, in the visible. I am so delighted, so captivated, so locked in, hoping in God, that I'm not robbed by anything I can lose in this earthly realm. Wow. Those aren't the things that secure me. Those are not the things that satisfy me. Those are not the things in which I am placing my hope. How do you hurt a life like that? By the way, we need to sharpen our lives around the basic disciplines. If the trick is, it says day by day, setting my heart on things not seen. If you spend, I'm sorry to harp on this, there is no way around this truth. No one will ever change my mind on it. If you spend more and more and more time, not involved in sinful things, just involved in visible, earthly, material things, and you start to spend less and less and less time in the house of God and in His Word, what is it that you think is going to keep you focused on things unseen rather than things temporal? It's not going to happen. This taking your brain and setting it on the things of God is a discipline that Paul says you do daily. Or you will lose your heart. You will lose your heart. You don't have to commit adultery. The spirit of this age just works to tie you up with the things of this life. And the things of this life are like this. Physical, visible things. You need a discipline that turns your life away from that and sets it on the things of God. That's why, in a different era, I'm not pleading for this. I understand the weaknesses of days gone by. I have no hankering to go back to the old days. I like the days in which we live. But that's why people understood. They understood something, even if they didn't say it right and they didn't legislate it right. But when I was a kid, you would go down the street and you wouldn't even see very many people. I'm not talking Christians. I'm talking people. You wouldn't see people washing their windows, cutting their grass, putting shingles on the house. People and Christians now had this understanding that I need this day. It wasn't a matter like if you were doing something fun on Sunday, you were going to hell. Okay, I'm not talking that. But what they understood was a concept that we've forgotten. It takes a certain weight, a certain pull, a certain emphasis to turn our hearts from the things we normally see and touch and do. Something that says, here, there's an eternal realm. And it's not going to just float down into your mind like a fog. You set your heart on it. Point number 3. Hope fights impatience by learning to always give God the benefit of the doubt in times of confusion. I say learn because no one does this automatically, and no one does it easily. It takes patience to do it. Have you ever heard the legend of Moses by the well? It's not a biblical account. It's just a legend. I'm not claiming infallibility for it, but it does convey acute truth. I don't remember even where I got this. It reads like this. Just listen. A legend says that Moses once sat near a well in meditation. A wayfarer stopped to drink from the well, and when he did so, his purse fell from his belt into the sand. Stay with this. It's a pretty involved story. The man departed. Shortly afterwards, another man passed near the well, saw the purse, and picked it up. Later, a third man stopped to quench his thirst and went to sleep in the shadow of the well. Meanwhile, the first man had discovered that his purse was missing and, assuming that he must have lost it at the well, returned, awoke the sleeper, who of course knew nothing of the whole incident, and demanded his money back. An argument followed, and irate, the first man slew the third man. Whereupon Moses said to God, "You can see why it is that people don't believe in you." Now, you've probably never said that, but you've thought those words. You've had just a wretched month, and you were kneeling by your bed trying to focus on Psalm 23, and what you ended up thinking was, you know, I can absolutely, look at my life, I can understand why people are atheists. You can see why it is that men don't believe in you. There is so much evil and injustice in the world. Why should the first man have lost his purse and then become a murderer? Why should the second have gotten a purse full of gold without having worked for it? And the third was completely innocent. Why was he slain? God answered, "For once, and only once, I will give you an explanation. I will not do it every time and may never do it again." The first man was a thief's son. The purse contained money stolen by his father from the father of the second man, who, finding the purse, only found what was due him. The third was a murderer whose crime had never been exposed and who received from the first the punishment he deserved. Now, in the future, believe that there is sense and righteousness in what transpires, even when you don't understand it. It's a neat story, isn't it? If the story isn't biblical, its message sort of is. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. For those who are called according to his purpose. Or our text from Isaiah 64:4, from of old no one has heard or perceived by the eye, no eye has seen a God beside you, who acts for those who wait for him. I wish I had more time to show you how God does this over and over again in the Scriptures. There are lots of accounts. I could give you just one. Toward the end of a prolonged Jewish exile in Babylon, Jewish scholars were beginning to wonder how God would ever be able to fulfill his promises to Jeremiah that he would once again bring his people out of bondage and into their own land. And God was about to amaze them with a solution. It's in Ezra, chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. I won't take time to read it. God was going to raise up Cyrus, king of Persia. Cyrus was not a godly man, not a godly king. He had no track record of serving God, and he had no intention of serving God. But he was going to serve God. And God was going to use Cyrus to deliver the people out of captivity and let them return to their land. And we know that 42,000 Jewish refugees returned and started building the temple because of Cyrus. Now, many of us know the amazing story of that fulfilled prophecy. It gets told over and over. But it doesn't end there, and we usually don't follow up on it. The road to glory is rarely a straight line. Once Cyrus delivered those Jews and they went back to their land and started restoring work, their enemies back in Judah opposed them and discouraged their efforts. That's in Ezra chapter 4, verses 4 and 5. And then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build and bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purpose. All the days of King Cyrus of Persia, even under the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Now imagine the discouragement. God had marvelously opened a door, brought them back, and now they sat and watched their enemies close it in their faces. They discouraged them. They fought them every turn of the way. There's more to this amazing story. Ezra chapter 5 verse 1, God sends two prophets. You wouldn't know about them except you probably know books of the Bible are named after them. That's the only way we even think about them much anymore. Haggai and Zechariah. God sends these two prophets to encourage these people back in their land being opposed. And so Haggai and Zechariah come and try and rouse the people and declare the word of the Lord and encourage their hearts, but the enemies go even further. They actually write a letter to the new emperor who followed Cyrus, Darius, begging Darius to put a stop on the work of these foolish Jews. Darius is not a godly man either, and he would normally have very little use for the Jews. But Darius began to search the archives, and it just happens that he came across an old mandate from the days of Cyrus, authorizing the Jews to go back and start building the temple. Darius immediately sends out a letter with these words, Ezra 6, 7, and 8. Let the work on the house of God alone. These are the people that wrote him saying, stop these Jews. Let the work on this house of God alone. Let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews rebuild this house of God on its site. Moreover, I make a decree regarding what you shall do for these elders of the Jews for the rebuilding of this house of God. The cost is to be paid to these men in full and without delay from the royal revenue, the tribute of the province from beyond the river. These stories are placed in the Bible to teach us to hope in God. Think about it. What's really going on here? Didn't God know about those enemies of the Jews back in their land when he caused Cyrus to send them home? Didn't God know that when they got there, they were just going to face nothing but opposition and hardship and struggle? Didn't God know about all the delays, the setbacks? Didn't God know about the discouragement they would be up against? Yes. Yes, God knew all of it. Then why does he put them through all of that? And the answer is stunning. The answer is, God put them through all of that because he not only wanted them to be back in their own land building the temple, God wanted Darius and the treasury to pay for God's temple. Now, between the time of Cyrus and the time of Darius, there were faithful workers who don't know anything about what you and I just read. What a precious gift we have in God's Word. There were all sorts of people. All they knew was Cyrus had sent them back, and so God must have a purpose. And they'd get up every morning and grab their lunch bucket and their hammer and whatever they built with, and off they'd go and just start working on the temple. And it was hot, sweaty work, and a lot of them grew old and died. Just the same voices heckling and the same forces opposing. They never saw the result of their labor. But God knew. And we know. We are given precious promises to keep us patient. Precious stories to keep us hoping in God more than anything else. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Do you believe that? Let's pretend I'm talking to you. Do you believe that? Do you believe that God follows you everywhere, every day, through every trial and every circumstance? Do you believe that he follows up on your life with goodness and mercy? Do you believe that in everything he will cause you to conquer and to work for your good? That's where our hope lies. But you'll never see it if you're impatient. You'll never see it. Let me give you homework. And isn't it great to have such a loving pastor who's so kind that this is the memory verse he gives you. The Lord is good to those who wait for him. Lamentations 3:25. Say it with me. The Lord is good to those who wait for him. Check your heart. Check your heart. When you find yourself thinking about what is it you're really looking forward to this week? And whatever problem you have, if you could have it solved this week, what would you want this week? What would make you incredibly happy if you had your way tomorrow morning? What is it you can't wait to have happen next week, next month? What is the picture that's forming in your mind right now? You can have it. What do you want? Now, to the extent that the object being framed in your mind's desires isn't eternal and Godward, you're setting your soul up for a great fall this week. That's what I'm trying to say. To the extent that the desire of your heart isn't eternal and Godward, you're setting yourself up for a disaster. And then just pull that little memory verse out and play it over a few times. The Lord is good to those who wait for him.